The police lights reflected off the lake like red and blue lightning. The banner that said Community Fishing Day flapped in the wind, half torn, half soaked. I stood there in the mud, holding the deed my grandmother had signed in 1968, creased dirty, but still mine. And across from me, Diane Crowley, HOA president, queen of the cul-de-sac, screamed that community property overrides selfish ownership. That was the moment I realized how far she was willing to go to take what wasn't hers. 3 weeks earlier, all I wanted was a quiet summer. I'd spent 20 years photographing wolves and eagles in the wild, and I thought I understood territory. Turns out the suburbs are wilder than Yellowstone. I live by Lakeview Estates, not in it by it. My land sits right on the lake, 5 acres my grandmother left me, including a small marina she built herself. She taught me that boundaries exist for a reason, that dignity means standing your ground when someone tests it. One calm June morning, I was fixing loose boards on the dock when I heard that sharp, rehearsed voice behind me. "This lake belongs to all of us, Diane." Crowley, HOA president, strutted onto my property like she was stepping onto a runway. Behind her were 3 guests, people I'd never seen before, carrying fishing poles and cooler bags. Diane pointed at my dock like she was unveiling a park feature. I told her calmly, "This marina's been in my family since 1968. It's private property." She smiled, the kind of smile that never touches the eyes, and started talking about community spirit and shared amenities. She said her attorney had reviewed the matter and found something called a community benefit clause. I said, "Good for him. This land isn't part of your HOA." She didn't argue directly. She just left me with a warning. Good neighbors find ways to cooperate. That fake friendly tone was her weapon. I watched her leave her designer sandals crunching on my gravel path, and I felt the first spark of unease. It wasn't what she said, it was how certain she was. Like she already had a plan. 3 days later, an email arrived. Subject line, shared amenity. Access Marina Facility. It came from the HOA board with Diane's name right at the bottom. They wanted me to sign an agreement allowing residents to use my dock for 6 hours a day, every day. I'd retain nominal ownership, they said, while granting permanent easement rights. That's legal talk, for we take it, you keep paying the taxes. I called Diane right away. She answered on the second ring chipper as ever. When I told her the marina wasn't part of the HOA, she said, "Oh, we've had it reviewed. It's in everyone's best interest." I could almost hear her smirk through the phone. I hung up before I said something I'd regret. Then the shift began. Neighbors stopped waving. People crossed the street when they saw me. One evening, my friend Willa, the only decent neighbor, texted me screenshots from the community group chat. Diane had been calling me uncooperative and selfish, accusing me of hoarding a natural resource. The comments were full of fake moral outrage. Nobody mentioned that it was private land. By Friday, it got worse. I went down to check my dock and found 5 strangers fishing there like it was a public pier. I asked politely if they knew this was private property. One guy, sunburned, mid-40s, that smug kind of neighbor energy, said Diane told us it's open for community use. When I told them they were trespassing, he shrugged and said I'd regret being so rigid. It wasn't a threat, but it wasn't friendly either. That night, I ordered motion-triggered cameras, professional grade, the kind I used on fieldwork. I wasn't taking chances. Still, sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the house sounded like someone cutting another lock. It happened again this next weekend, a full-blown picnic on my dock. 10, maybe 12 people, coolers, kids, music, the works. When I told them to leave, a man pulled out his phone and started filming, shouting that I was harassing families. Diane wasn't there, but her fingerprints were all over it. So I called the police. When the officers arrived, they checked my deed, the tax records, everything. "This is private property," the deputy said. The crowd scattered fast after that muttering about how the HOA had misled them, but Diane wasn't done. Later that night, I found my gate lock sawed through. That was her message. She owned the crowd. I sat at my desk surrounded by deeds, survey maps, tax papers, every proof my grandmother had left me. For the first time, I doubted myself. Maybe I should just give in, let them use it a few weekends a month, keep the peace. Was I being selfish? But then I looked at a photo on my wall. My grandmother standing on this very dock, camera in hand. Eyes steady. She'd fought her own battles to keep this land. She hadn't backed down. Why should I? That's when I called Malcolm Hastings, a property lawyer in town. When I walked into his office with a folder full of 4K videos, photos, and emails, he raised an eyebrow and said, "You're the first client who brought evidence worth a Netflix docuseries." He went through everything, then looked up and said, "The HOA doesn't have a leg to stand on. That clause they keep mentioning doesn't even exist." He drafted a cease and desist letter 10 pages long, warning Diane and her board that continued trespassing or false claims would lead to lawsuits for fraud and defamation. We sent it certified mail. 3 days later, Willa texted HOA called an emergency meeting. "You're the topic." I showed up uninvited, laptop and projector in hand. The community center was packed. Diane sat at the front like a judge, perfectly composed. She opened the meeting by saying a resident, meaning me, was threatening the HOA with baseless lawsuits. People murmured in agreement. I let her finish, then stood up. I plugged in my laptop and projected the first slide, my grandmother's deed dated 1968. This land existed decades before Lakeview Estates. It's not part of your HOA. Never was. Next slide, the survey map, my 5 acres in blue, their HOA in red, no overlap. Then the tax records all separate. The room got quiet. I could feel the tension shift. Then I played the video. Footage of trespassers, the picnic, the broken lock, Diane herself giving orders. Every face clear, every timestamp visible. When it ended, you could hear the air conditioner hum. Diane stood up, voice shaking but still defiant. "This is manipulated. He's twisting everything to make me look bad." Malcolm stood beside me and said evenly, "All footage has been authenticated by a forensic expert. Metadata's intact." She looked around this room for support. None came. Someone near the back said, "We were told this was legal." Another man said, "If there's no attorney, then we've been lied to." The murmurs grew until one board member finally said, "I motion to remove Diane Crowley as president." The vote was quick, almost unanimous. In a single minute, her empire collapsed. Diane froze, mouth open, color draining from her face. She tried to speak, but the words died in her throat. Someone else, the acting president, now apologized to me publicly and promised no more trespassing. I gathered my things and walked out, leaving Diane staring down at the table that used to symbolize her control. 2 weeks later, she gave her public apology, shaky voice, eyes down, admitting she'd faked the lawyer. Organized illegal gatherings, spread lies. I didn't attend, but Willa recorded it. Watching her read that statement was strange, not satisfying, not really. Just final. The HOA paid $20,000 in damages. I used $5,000 of it to rebuild the dock, another $5,000 to fund the county's youth fishing program. Diane's husband's business lost clients. They sold their house a month later. Justice had been served, though it didn't feel triumphant, just necessary. Now the dock stands stronger than before. A new sign hangs at the gate. Private property, protected by law. Some neighbors still wave a few, pretend nothing happened. I let them. I don't need their approval. One morning, as fog rolled across the lake, I took my camera out like old times. The water was still reflecting the pink dawn. I thought about my grandmother, how she'd refused to bend when others tried to take this land. I finally understood her lesson: boundaries only work if you defend them. So when people say community means sharing, I nod, but what I learned is simpler. True peace begins when you stop letting bullies rewrite what's yours.